Hello and welcome along to another EFL Manager special from the Honest Football Podcast. I'm joined by Charlie Betts as always, and today we've got another club to go by. And this one, probably not so surprising based on our last championship predictions, because Bristol City at about 11 o'clock last night, following a 2-0 defeat against Reading, relieved Dean Holden of his duties after about 6 months in charge. He obviously served as assistant to Lee Johnson from 2016 onwards as well. But Charlie, I guess following Saturday's drubbing at Watford, I mean, we sort of said it in the predictions. If he was ever going to get a reaction, it was this game. And when he didn't, I guess the outcome was probably inevitable, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's tough to. I mean, whichever way you dress it up, 8 goals in 2 games without reply is it's not going to lend you any favours. But it's the context it's in. The thing is, I watched the highlights, and we can only go by the highlights. You obviously watched them against Luton, maybe a bit more for you to comment on. But what worried me a little bit was the defending, in the sense of it. Watford's goals, apart from the screaming from Will Hughes, 5 of the rest of them were identical. Is that ball between the centre half and the fullback, and whether that's him or whether that's the players, I don't know. I'm sure we'll get onto that a bit in a minute. But it just doesn't. It didn't seem like it was changing, and it was the same really of Reading last night. Admittedly, one was a set piece, but they just kept getting behind them. So, I think from an owner's perspective, it just didn't seem like they were learning from those mistakes. At the end of the day, your expectation at the beginning of the season and halfway through might change a little bit. But I don't think anyone would have expected Bristol City to be romping the league, but to be playing the way they are and not making any progress and not learning from those mistakes was worrying for me, to be honest.
And you mentioned it quite nicely there. Successive defeats away from home, 6 or 7 now, and also 6 defeats in a row just in the league in general. I guess looking at where they are in the table, they've fallen away from that playoff picture. And pretty similarly to Lee Johnson last year, he was probably in a slightly better position and got sacked. So I guess there was never ever going to be a surprise, and there wasn't going to be any further leeway, was there?
No. I mean, having said that, they had a decent start to the season.
Yeah.
I think the first possibly 7-8 games, up until the international break, they were flying, really. And then, obviously that took the wind out of their sails. But given what you say, like Lee Johnson was sacked for a better run, if I don't want a better, I can't really think of a better way of wording it, but he was sacked for a better run than what they've been under on Dean Holden. I mean, that is always the risk, I suppose, if you promote from within. Are you getting a bit more of a continuation of maybe some of the issues that are already there? Sometimes it works. I'm not saying it's foolproof, but sometimes if it's not working under the manager, if you're promoting his assistant, you're probably getting a bit more of a continuation of the same.
Obviously, you mentioned the fact that Dean Holden was promoted within, and it's something that we probably haven't talked about a huge amount, because it's something Bristol City fans have said as well. While many of them didn't think he was the right man, they're not really laying the blame at Dean Holden, because at the club, the chief executive, Mark Ashton, is bearing the brunt of that for going for what was seen to be probably the safer or the cheaper option, which I guess you can understand in a pandemic, rather than the best option for the club. So based on that, with the next appointment, do you think the same's going to happen, or do you think the lessons will be learned from that one?
I mean, they're only mid-table. See, it's tough. If you're talking about a team that's near the relegation zone, I'd think you'd have to be a bit more bold quickly and maybe overspend a little bit and get someone in who's gonna save you. I can't see. I know they're on the slide and they're not in a great position at all. I can't see them getting relegated. I think the unfortunate is other teams in probably more dire situations than them. I mean, I've got a name that I'll talk about in a bit, but someone it's a bit of a longer term, but maybe a promoting from leagues below. I don't think personally we'll get to that, but I don't think they need a Nigel Pearson or someone like that in the situation they're in. For that reason, really, I think this needs to be a longer term investment now, rather than, like you say, maybe a cheap option to cover up the holes that they had, after Lee Johnson left.
And at the moment, of course, assistant head coach Paul Simpson, a person you know well from a recent interview, and Keith Downing are taking charge. And interestingly, in the statement, it says we'll take charge of training until further notice, which suggests that they're planning on having a quick appointment, if nothing else. There's no mention of them being temporarily in charge for matches and things. But even on that, based on the Dean Holden situation, is it fair to say we don't expect either of those to be involved in the long-term or the permanent appointments?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Paul Simpson, forgetting about what people we've interviewed have said about him, his record earlier on in his career, promotions, but lower down the leagues. I don't know if the Championship is maybe a bit of a bridge too far, but then he was an assistant at Newcastle, so he's been in the big leagues as well. So I think you could have worse people to cover that gap, but by the sounds of it, they've already got someone lined up. I feel a bit, like you say, going back a step really quickly in terms of Dean Holden, I feel a bit that he was made a bit of a scapegoat until they got the right person in. But then at the same breath, it is hard if the players are not necessarily buying into what he wants to do. Are we going to have more of the same if Paul Simpson and that, take over for a little bit, in a similar sort of vein to it all, really? So, well, I don't know. The thing is, it's hard. Whoever comes in, Paul Simpson's been a manager, and I don't know. There's 2 ways of looking at that. You can obviously see it as a threat to your position, not that he's going to undermine you, but is he got eyes on the job, or is he someone who you could use who's got loads of experience and can help benefit the club? So I don't personally want to comment because I don't know them, but it is a tough situation. I imagine if they're going to have a longer term investment of a manager, he'll probably bring his own staff in.
No, I completely agree. Obviously, we'll wait and see what happens on that because, as we've mentioned, the financial situation for a lot of clubs, even further up the pyramid, is a bit dire at the minute. But I guess we've got to move on to that sort of talk about potential new men because it's very early on. And unlike a lot of the other jobs, I guess, I will mention one surprise name that pops up at fifth on the list, which we've gone through a couple of times already. But I guess with these sort of managerial situations, particularly in the Championship, there's been two schools of thought, which is the quick fix one. So like Cardiff, for example, it was all of the older heads in charge. And here, it's all of the people who are sort of the longer term appointments, as you mentioned. So number one at the minute is Eddie Howe, closely followed by the likes of Cooks and Cowley. And then we've got Mark Hughes and Nathan Jones turning up in fifth place again. But Charlie, I guess looking to you, you've mentioned already that you think it should probably be a longer term appointment or someone with a bit more of a vision and a project. Who do you see it being?
See, the thing is, I really hope they don't fall into that trap of, like you say, going on that merry-go-round. I mean, Eddie Howe would, in terms of maybe the style of football that you play with the players that Bristol City have got, would be better suited to it. I mean, the thing is, I'd love to see, I know this sounds silly, but Ryan Lowe at Plymouth, I think he'd be ideal for that job. He's down in that area anyway, because I'm not saying that Bristol's in, middle of nowhere, but it is obviously a different part of the country. We've spoken to players lower down the leagues, and that can have an impact on, where you take your next job. He's obviously taking Plymouth up to League One, just outside the playoffs, but I don't know if they're going to quite have enough to go up. And the reason I say him, I think he's a young manager. His win percentage is incredible. It's up to nearly 50%. I just think he'd be suited to it personally. I don't think they'll get him. But someone of that ilk, this is such a tough time because, without getting ahead of ourselves, and I don't want to jump the gun, I think there's going to be a lot more of these specials coming out in the next week or so. Yeah. There's going to be a lot of people available. There's going to be lots of names. So if I am, for example, an Eddie Howe or Nigel Pearson, do I hang on possibly for like what someone like Birmingham going to do? I'm not saying I'd go there. What I'm saying is there's other jobs that are looking a bit more insecure. So I don't know. Or does someone like him hang on for Celtic, say, in the summer? I don't know. It's just an example. This is such a crucial time. So that's why I think someone from lower down the leagues, like a Ryan Lowe or something like that, would be a better shout. Who's going to be hungry, who's going to want to make that step up, hasn't managed in the Championship before, but it's got great pedigree, rather than someone who's already been up in the Championship and above there. So for me, I would take like a Ryan Lowe or a Paul Cook, one of those two. I know I'm not going to go over the Paul Cook. Again, if you want to see that, watch any other manager special from me. But no, I just think the both of them, good brand of football, lower down the leagues, will be hungry for that job. And it's a great opportunity for both them and the club, and a long-term investment. But it has to be, I don't want to mention Bristol Rovers on a Bristol City podcast, but they went for Paul Tisdale, who we would have said was more of an investment manager, and got rid of him quite quickly. I think whoever they get in now, they're in a great position being mid-table, that they can afford to give them, a couple of years to sort of overhaul the club, really, personally.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, to be honest. And Paul Cook is the name that jumped out at me from the list. But I guess whoever comes in, and we'll talk about where you think they're going to finish this season and all of that in a moment. The first few games are a bit of a mixed bag. So they're at home to Barnsley, who we've mentioned are far stronger at home quite often, bar a couple of games. Middlesbrough away, where Middlesbrough are significantly stronger at home. And Swansea away, where Swansea always win 2-0. So it's going to be quite a difficult start for whoever comes in if they're appointed before this game at the weekend.
Yeah, definitely. I think, we say that they've got to address about the goals. We said it of a lot of these manager specials. I think, like you say, that there's some good opportunities in those first few games. What worries me is if you look at the stats of Bristol City, they're letting so many goals in the first 10 minutes of a game, which is that the way the previous manager was setting up. So that's something I'd be looking to address, whoever it is coming in straight away, is that first 10, 15 minutes for Bristol City seems to be crucial. So they're letting so many goals there. But that's not a quick approach. That does take quite a lot of coaching and quite a lot of a different setup to the way you do match days. A lot of change might have to happen. So I think whoever comes in the first 3 games, they might have to bite the bullet a little bit just to get that different mindset about the way they approach match days and things like that.
Yeah, well, we saw it with Mick McCarthy at Cardiff recently, and it's starting to bear fruit now, isn't it? But you mentioned probably the perfect thing I was going to ask in terms of form and the way they play is, despite being in what is a relatively safe mid-table position, they've got the third worst defensive record in the league now after the last 2 games. And I mean, you've answered part of it already, but whoever comes in, even if it is an Eddie Howe or a Paul Cook, one of those slightly more attacking managers, surely it's going to have to be built on defence first.
Oh yeah, definitely, 100%. And I think particularly away from home. I mean, that first half away from home has been dire for Bristol City in the last sort of 6 or 7 games. So I think no matter how much attacking football you want to play, if you haven't got a good foundation to build from, you're going to struggle. But I think it's a mindset thing. As they proved earlier on in the season, there is a good squad. You look on paper, it's a very good squad. Yeah. It's definitely a mindset thing, maybe a new approach, and someone who's going to not go with Kevin Keegan and try and just outscore, but maybe they've been too conservative and it's blown up a little bit. But one thing I would say from a coach perspective, they need to sort out that back four because it's so square and so high, and no one seems to do anything about it and to address the fact they're getting exploited with that ball in behind constantly. So I would like to think whoever comes in, even if you're an attacking manager, if you can put a bit more pressure on the opposition's back line and things like that, it allows you to play higher, but also then gives you the opportunity to defend properly. Whereas I think at the minute, not putting enough pressure up the top and still sitting far too high. And I don't think Dean Holden necessarily had the wherewithal of knowing how to sort that. So whoever comes in, if they're an attacking style manager, hopefully could almost push the opposition back a little bit, just to give them a bit of a breather. And first 15, 20 minutes, see if we can build on from there.
And I guess the final questions we'll always ask is, as you mentioned, Bristol City are one of the most mid-table sides in the Championship as it stands, looking at the table. In 13th place, they're 7 points off the playoffs, albeit Bournemouth have got a game in hand in 6th. And they're fairly comfortably 11 points clear of the relegation zone, but the teams in the bottom 3 have all got a game in hand. So you've already said you don't see there being any threat of relegation. But if they get the right man in Bristol City, whereabouts are they going to finish this year?
Honestly, I think if Vic McCarthy hadn't have gotten a job at Cardiff City, they might have sneaked 7th, 8th around there. But I mean, Blackburn Rovers and Stoke are not in great form, so they might leapfrog them. I can't see them getting much harder than 7th or 8th. I think, to be honest, given the work, whoever comes in, it's a longer job. Relegation is not an issue. I can't see that at all. No. I think whoever comes in will probably have a positive bounce, will have a positive impact. But I think, unfortunately, that top 8 now, it's not starting to pull away, but there's teams who are starting to hit form again, the likes of Reading, the likes of Cardiff, obviously. Borough, under Neil Warnock, although they've been woeful recently, you can never really write them off and say, right, that's their season finished. So I think, unfortunately, that top 8 is probably going to start, as this is nothing to do with Bristol City necessarily, but it's going to start to pull away now for the rest of the season anyway. And I think they'll just sit in between that sort of 8th, 12th, 13th position, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in agreement with you. I think it's probably a little too late to make the playoffs. With the right appointment, a top half finish this year and starting to push next season would certainly be the right way about it. I guess sort of the approach they had under Lee Johnson, but they'll be hoping just to go that final hurdle. But I guess the final question I'm going to ask you, Charlie, and depending on the name of the person, it's probably a 2-word answer. You've said who you would possibly like the new manager to be at Bristol City, but in 2 words, who do you think it's going to be?
I think Paul Cook. He's available. That's all I would say. Paul Cook's available, and that would give a lot less hassle and a quick appointment. And it suggests they're going to do a quick appointment. I'm sorry that wasn't 2 words, but if they've already said that the assistants are just doing training this week, it's got to be someone who's not at a club already. So for me, Paul Cook. Sorry, that wasn't 2 words, but you get the idea.
Completely agree. I think Paul Cook is the right man for the job. He's proven such at his previous clubs, and he's always got promotions at his previous clubs. So he's certainly the right man for me. And as you say, not having compensation again is a big thing at the moment, particularly with the current financial situation. But that's all for this one. If you're a Bristol City fan, of course, let us know down in the comments who you'd like it to be, whether you agree with the Holden sacking. And of course, we've mentioned a few of the off-the-pitch bits that seem to be getting in the way. And I think it's fair to say that based on social media, which isn't always the perfect gauge, that is sort of the impression at the moment across the fans. But if you did enjoy this episode, please do put a thumbs up on it. Subscribe down below for regular content from the podcast. You can follow us over on Twitter at HonestFootball3. Thank you to Charlie for joining us as always, very early in the morning for us. And we'll see you next time.